Okay, so this is my first time trying this. Hopefully this works. Let's see, am I live? Is it going? Should be live. Yes. All right. Okay. So we are live. I hope there is sound. Let me verify that. It's gonna be an echo for a second. Excuse the echo. All right. Okay. So we are live. I hope there is sound. Okay. We're good. All right. So I want to do a quick stream. One, because I might have to stop using my current editing software and move over to streaming. And second is that I just wanted to try something new. And to be really blunt, I. We're good. All right, so I want to do a quick. Oops. I've been working on a script for a new video based on what I'm working on what I'm reading right now. And these are the two scripts in front of me. And one's just way too long. One's basically the beginning of a book, and the other one, while stripped down, I haven't really figured out what I want to say yet. They're the same script, same thing. So I want to talk about how difficult it is to talk about Christianity from an outsider's point of view. I'm a Catholic, I'm a Christian, but speaking about it as a both a believer and from an academic or literature or philosophical point of view is very difficult because the resources are very limiting. Not that there's limited resources, there's tons of stuff about religion out there, but there's just it's so it's such a pain in the ass to find unbiased resources. So I have a lot of Catholic resources. I have a lot of Protestant resources. I have the church fathers. I have some, I'm going to call them Protestant fathers. I don't even know what to call them. Reformers. I have Orthodox, Hebrew, Jewish rabbinical commentaries, but all of them are super biased. And even when you try to go to academic sources, their academic bias or atheistic bias gets in the way of their reporting. So I did this one. I did Judaism. Oxford's A Very Short Introduction to Judaism by Norman Solomon. And there's nothing about Judaism in here. It's all talking about how it's not true, but how Jewish people should be respected. That doesn't help. That doesn't help you learn anything about Judaism to say that the Jewish people have been persecuted. We know this. Okay. So then we have the one that I'm working on right now, which is A Very Short Introduction, or Christianity, A Very Short Introduction by Linda Woodhead. And apparently there's a first version, a first edition that is more pious in its interpretation of Christianity. And in this version, she's taken a more secular point of view. She's clearly read a ton of Bart Ehrman and has been really influenced by him. Hey, I have too. I've taken his courses online. I've taken his the available courses you can get from used to be called iTunes U. I know it's gone, but Great Courses Plus. I bought some of his audio courses and some of his online available courses that you can get through different resources. And I really like his stuff, but to this person, she's just lost her faith. She has no context for the history of Christianity. To her, it's all just a jumbled mess. Uh, the state of her faith when she was writing this is reflected in her work, But this is supposed to be a secular work. It should be objective, and there's no objectivity. It's just her opinion on Christianity. There are like 4 or 5 really great histories of Christianity out there, and they're all biased to the Catholic perspective. And I don't just mean the modern sources. I mean, even the ancient sources, whether it's Eusebius, whether it's another ancient writer or a medieval writer, they're Catholic and they're coming from a Catholic point of view. So this is very frustrating. When you look at Protestant sources, they're anti Catholic and they just twist the history. And secular sources try to deny the history. It's a no win situation when trying to find the truth because there are agreed upon facts. So that's what this is. This is me reading through all of this stuff and combining everything I've studied since really since 20, I would say, I don't know, 2013, 2015 maybe. Everything I've read from then until now is about almost a 10-year period, a 9-year period. And of course, I've been reading about religion. One of the first books I ever read and enjoyed truly was the book of Revelation. I would read that to myself in junior high. I would read my comic books and then I'd read the book of Revelation. And that's kind of all that I would read and enjoy reading. Um, but the Bible is something that I've read many, many times. I have many different study Bibles from many different denominations, and you get to get a flavor for their biases and a flavor for um, their perspectives, and it helps you understand these other religions. But when looking at Christianity, at some point you want to talk to someone who's not only unbiased, but you want to tell someone who's looking at Christianity the basic facts, the basic truths of Christianity. And it's hard to do when all the sources are trying to promote their point of view, their faith, their denomination, their humanism, their atheism, whatever, their philosophy. They're more concerned with promoting their philosophy, their theology, their denomination than they are with the facts on the ground. So that's what this is. And so I just want to kind of go through this with you all because like I said, I haven't been able to finish it. Um, if anyone hops into chat here, please feel free to comment. I have a little chat notification up here. I hope I can see it. Let me see. But I would like to get maybe your questions as well. Like, what have you noticed about this? It's just a pain when trying to find the real history or the real truth of these practices. I probably should have promoted this on everything, but I didn't. But it doesn't matter. Okay, so let's go through this a little bit. So we have an introduction here, and in the introduction, I'm taking the perspective of someone from Alpha Centauri. And that was the whole point of this channel. When this channel was first went into BookTube, before I started talking about religion, after I stopped talking about the martial arts stuff, um, it was the whole point is to come to these things from an outside perspective. That's why when I was doing biblical study on this channel, it was through a philosophical and literary lens. I was more interested in the literary skill that went into the Bible and the philosophy that's come out of it than the, you know, religious aspect. I already believed that. I wasn't concerned with that. I wasn't even necessarily trying to convert people. I was just trying to talk about the facts. That's why I uh, subscribed and listened to and bought so many courses on uh, biblical literature, uh, ancient Sumerian, Assyrian, all these ancient texts. That's why I bought all these ancient books with the original translation on one side and the original with the original script, I guess, on one side, and then the translation on the other side. That's why I did that, because that's very interesting to me. And so here I'm taking this perspective of, well, what are we looking at when we're looking at Christianity? And there's this really terrible false claim out there that Christianity is not a religion, or that Christianity uh, is not a faith, that it's about, a relationship with Jesus Christ, whatever that means. So I start off with the definition of a religion. The sources that I got, and mind you, this is just a rough. This is my initial rough draft, which was way too long, and then my second draft, which is compact. I don't have sources listed yet. This is mostly coming from, the definitions are coming from my favorite dictionary, which is the Oxford Unabridged Dictionary, which is like this huge freaking thing. It's bigger than a Bible, man. I first heard about it and saw it on Gilmore Girls. It was given to a gift to Rory, and that's both a when I fell in love with Rory as a character. Mind you, I was like, I don't know, 18 or 17 when I watched Gilmore Girls for the first time. Anyway, not the point. So I fell in love with these characters in this moment. And then the girl I was dating at the time, Val Valeska, sorry, I was such an ass. We were big into reading the Marquis de Sade and a few other books. And she bought me as a gift for my birthday this unabridged encyclopedic dictionary. It was expensive. She worked at a bookstore. She was very cute. She was Russian. I messed things up so bad with her. Anyway, uh, so she gets me this encyclopedic dictionary. So that's the dictionary that I'm using. I'm not using, and I have the compilations of, the dictionary of religion or the dictionary of philosophy or the dictionary of psychology, whatever. I'm going with the Oxford encyclopedic definition. And then from there, and I make the argument that Christianity matches the qualifications for religion. So you can't get around from that. That is the distinction. It is a religion. Um, so then I move on from there to the history of religion to show how it has evolved and where religion came from. On the shorter version, I don't get that into it. On the longer version, on the 12-page version, and remember, I'm just trying to hit out the points. I talk about the the earliest ritual burial sites. I talk about the earliest cultures that have references to religion. I talk about Jericho and a few other ancient cities. I only picked two here, but I know there's a few other ones that I could have picked from my studies. I talk about the first writings that really show up, whether it's Sumerian or any other culture that used Phoenician writing or wedge writing. So I get into all of that. I don't do this here, but I've been doing this research on this part of religion for years. It deeply interests me. It's part of the reason why I watch Religion for breakfast and a few other, subscribe to a few other channels like that. And I show how Christianity pulls from these ancient traditions. I'm talking about the fact that Christianity does develop, does evolve from these first ideas. And these religions are in this same Fertile Crescent area. They're in the Middle East. So the reason why the biblical narrative, there are many reasons why, but the reason why the biblical narrative as it's presented now starts off in Ur is super important. The reason why Eden is in that area is super important. It's to quote Peterson, it's a genetic memory. But people had time to think in the ancient times, and they're not some de-evolved human with a different brain. They're humans. They have the same cognitive abilities that we have. So they were able to think of things. And one of the things they thought of is, well, where did all these ideas come from? And so they layer it into the subtext of Genesis. And mind you, Genesis, and I talk about this in later on in this paper. Uh, Genesis is written after the exile on their return. It's not written beforehand. Now there are hints that the characters, Adam, Eve, those characters are present in whatever Israeli mythology existed pre First Temple, maybe even pre Second Temple, because the First Temple might not be what we thought it was. Okay, so yeah, those narratives and oral traditions and fables might have been there, but they weren't codified and they weren't turned into religious principles. They weren't turned into truth until much later. And so that's what this work is doing. Is I'm pointing to where do we get burial rites? Where do we get marriage rites? Where do we get these rituals, these Jewish rituals that will become Christian rituals? Well, we get them from the earliest ritualization that would become religion. Okay, so I get past that. And then, still not seeing a lot of comments. And then I get to, where are we at? Let's see here. I define what the purpose of what religion is, that it's a binding of oneself to certain principles, that it's an expression of observances. Basically, items become sacred, whether they're metaphysical items or whether they're literal items. And then these items get passed down, and these traditions and actions get passed down, but they've been sanctified and they've been ritualized, and there's a reason why we're doing them. But sometimes the reason can be lost and you're just doing the action. Well, the reason for these actions is encoded into the ritual itself. And let's pretend that Peterson's idea about snakes and trees is why people begin to evolve. Let's just say that idea is correct. Well, then we would have a religious ceremony in every single religion that exists that at least comes from this cluster, this beginning, this matrix, and it would be as part of the ritual. We would either kill a snake or handle a snake or bop a fake metaphorical snake on the head with a stick as part of that religion, and we might turn the metaphor into defeating the devil or defeating the serpent that tempted Eve. Mind you, this ritual doesn't exist. I'm just presenting the concept. And so that tradition would then be ritualized and be part of, like, let's say every time you go to church, you either pretend to hit the snake before you got in or pretend to hit the snake when you left. And that would be a way of keeping that memory in the human body, actually acting it out, actually doing the practice. So from there, I then get into some basic philosophy of religion terminologies. I define what they are, and I try to my best, and I don't do it with every single term, but I try my best to, especially in the longer version, to connect it to Judaism at different parts of Judaism's evolution, because Christianity comes from Judaism. Judaism is going to come from this broader uh, Mesopotamian fertility, this Mesopotamian field of religion. So you got this Mesopotamian religion, then you have Judaism, then you have Christianity. And I'm trying to draw these connections and show how along the way Judaism is a reaction against each one of these practices when the Semitic people feel that they went astray, and specifically a small family of the Semitic people, a small subsect. And so I talk about practice and cult and sect and polytheism, naturism, totemism, zoology, animism, pantheism, heathenism, and paganism. The heathenism and paganism is actually kind of funny because I used to rely on this resource called Theosis Online. or theory online. And it dealt with a lot of pagan religions. And it had this really cool subsection that I can't find anymore. I can't find this page, where they would explain the difference between the rustic and the urban religions and how they were actually two separate religions, and how the individual cults were not originally pantheistic. You would have maybe a small trio of gods or family of gods, but each god on its own was its own cult with its own practices. And it wasn't so cool with ancient people that people just switched cults. Like, you were dedicated to a patron for a reason. Anyway, that's all like really cool history stuff. I got like tons of books, tons. I got like 4 or 5 books on the ancient practices of, I'm going to say religious practices of the different periods of Hellenistic religion, from the Hellenes all the way to the Greeks, and later the Macedonians. So I love that stuff. I got a little bit about what was going on over in Ephesus and what would later become Turkey. I have a little bit more than a little bit about what was going on in Rome. But that, what was going on in Greece is just amazing and interesting, how the cities would be opposed to each other's religions, and the patron gods were actually at war with each other at some point. It's really cool temple stuff. But it informs the culture that the Hebrews would be dealing with. And there are times that what's going on with the Israelites or the Hebrew people, their little skirmishes or little, what Quantum Leap used to call brushes with history, or brushes with historical events. These major moments touch, whether it's the Sea People, whether it's the Phoenicians going to Carthage, whether it's the deluge, the Great Deluge, whether it's what's going on with the Epic of Gilgamesh, or what's going on with Hammurabi. The Jews, I mean, that's who they'll eventually become, keep on touching history, and keep on having, in their version, obviously they're the main character, so they're play a big role, but they play these minor roles in all these big world events. And every time one of these big world events, they chronicle it, and it becomes part of their mythos, of their identity. And I think that's incredibly interesting. And they learn ethical and moral lessons from each one of these interactions. So anyway, I talk about that in the longer version. The shorter version, I just kind of hit it and quit it. Then I talk about how the culture of uh, the Semitic people is broader than just the Jewish people. Mind you, there's 12 tribes. But if you go beyond that, you have different cultures that genetically we probably couldn't tell the difference between who was Jewish now and who was Canaanite then, or who was Hittite, or who was Phoenician. They're all Semitic people. And the Semitic people that left from Ur, even in the biblical narrative, interbreed with these people. So even if at one point there was a, let's say, genetic distinction, that has been bred out over time. So you have basically Semitic people fighting Semitic people. And they forget that they're related. They're not just related in the Jewish narrative, they're related in the narratives of each of their people. So the Canaanites have a story of who the Israelites are. The Hyksos in Egypt, the Israel's, the ancient Israel that was destroyed by different powers. The I think he's a slave tribe, or the warrior tribe who fights in Kadesh, who's mentioned in these writings. Everyone has, they mention them. They're there. They're real. So you have these like brushes with history, brushes with tangible history. Okay. Then when we get past the surrounding cultures, and also just to mention that there, you have this really cool interaction going on at that time period between the judges and the Davidic kingdom, where Judaism is trying to, I guess, from the Jewish perspective, they're trying to stop the fracturing, but from the outside perspective, they're trying to coalesce all the different versions of the worshippers of El into one, coalesce it into one sanctioned temple religion. So they get rid of the different temples that are on the different mountains, and they make all these law codes. It's really interesting stuff, and interesting political stuff that's going on there, that when you read past the subtext and you're not trying to debunk the Bible, but you're actually looking at it as a historical text, you find a lot of really interesting, like, okay, I can see it from the other side, how this actually worked. I can see where the hatred shows up later on, whether it's in the New Testament or whether it's in other writings like Josephus, like Tacitus, when the Romans or the Greeks, you know, the Hellenes, um, the Seleucids are dealing with these tribal people surrounding these city centers of Jerusalem, and urban centers like Tyre, and whatever, what important city is in Egypt, and Babylon. You have these minor groups that have had to deal with these growing powers, including the growing power of Jerusalem, of Israel. So, okay, so let's say that the kingdom of Judah didn't exist, and let's say that the first temple, Judaism, as it's reported in the Bible, didn't exist. The conflicts that are recorded in Judges and in Kings did exist. That those conflicts did happen. So maybe the temple wasn't this huge building, but maybe it was a small, you know, more tent-like structure, like how it starts off in the Bible. Maybe it was a smaller building, and but the way that it gets reported and gets enlarged over time gets exaggerated, and it becomes more important, becomes this much bigger structure than actually was. But that doesn't mean that the structure didn't exist. That doesn't mean that David didn't exist. It's really great stuff. And I think Solomon's son is the first king that's verifiable, and Israeli king that's verifiable. And it's great because it's this irony of, like, okay, so his son is verifiable in history, but his father isn't. It's like he didn't just pop into existence. So clearly the dad existed too, even if maybe the name isn't the same name. And that's another thing that happens when we're talking to these Gnostics and mythicists, is that they get caught up on the English. And that's what I get into next, which is, so people are like, well, Jesus isn't a Jewish name. Yeah, but you know who it is? Yosef Bar Yosef, or Yosef, or Yeshua Bar Yosef, or Yeshua. Where is it? It's over here. Let me see. It's Yeshua of Nazarene, Nazarite, Nazarene. Let's see. There we go. Okay, Yeshua Ha Nazari. So you have these really cool Jewish name changes from the Hebrew to the Aramaic, from the Aramaic to the Greek, from the Greek to the Latin, from the Latin to English. And people stupidly forget that these are ancient Hebrew names, or ancient Canaanite names, or ancient Babylonian names. And they think that the American spelling is the actual spelling. It's like, people, come on. These are translated works, man. It's like thinking Julius Caesar spoke American English when you're, or British English when you're watching a movie. Like, come on, wake up. All right, so I get into the whole name thing. Um, we talk about the Jewish, the synagogue, church split, and how that comes about. I explain when the Bible was written and who wrote the Bible and where the Bible was written. And part of this is also a reaction to Dark of All Trades, because he comes out with this anonymous title for, meaning that we don't know who wrote it. That's just not true. We have the dates, we have the period, we have the schools, we have the traditions, we have almost every biblical commentary I've read has a story of who wrote it, how we know it's true, who we heard it from. Now, Bart Ehrman might say, "Yeah, but we don't trust this source anymore." Okay, so we don't trust the source, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a source. It's really weird. It's like, okay, so why don't you trust the source? Well, because we don't think that they could have predicted this thing, or we don't think they could have had knowledge of this. How do you know? You're just, I don't know. It's very poorly explained, and it's very poorly disattributed. I get it. You want to be skeptical and you don't want to present an opinion as a fact, but you can say we have a good opinion. We have a very strong opinion, which we do. And so I go through that. I go through when it was written, where it was written. Now, on the longer version, I really get into it a little bit too much, and it's long. It's a lot. It's a lot. The shorter version, I haven't figured out a way to keep it under 6 pages, because I want to make this video as short as possible. 15 minutes if possible, or if I have to, 30 minutes, but no longer than that. Well, a 12-page essay is, I mean, that's hours. So it's like a 2-hour video. I was also thinking about maybe dividing it up into pages, like each page be a different video and turn it into a series. I don't know. But I get into the juicy stuff. So, you know, I I just love that line. Bart Ehrman, be offended as he wants. Um, so I talk about when each of the disciples die, when each of the apostles die. I get a little bit into their martyrdom stories. I try to stay away from the more legendary stuff. Like I love the stuff about Spain, but I stay away from that. I'm sticking to only the stuff that's happening in and around Jerusalem. I take the time to explain why we don't have writings from Jerusalem. This is so obvious. I don't know why it's not reported more by apologists. There was a Jewish expulsion because of the revolts that were happening. And these these political criminals that were being crucified as thieves, as robbers, as revolutionaries, as, for treason and for terroristic threats against Rome, these were this made Rome expel the Jews because they didn't see a difference between Christian and Jew. They just kicked them all out. And the Jewish revolts meant that the Christians had to go somewhere. So a lot of Christians ended up in Alexandria. They just went straight to Egypt. That they were refugees. But other Jewish leaders and other Christian leaders ended up in different places, and that's where we get the traditions of where each apostle ended up. 72 apostles, by the way. Um, and you get these traditions that come out of them. You get four dominant traditions: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And you get, I think, 4 or 5 popular writings. So you get the oral tradition, and then you get the popular writings, which are the epistles, which is Paul, Peter, James. I want to say Judas, uh, or Saint Jude. I think there's someone else. And these are the writings that make up the churches. Certain churches have their preferred documents, but they all kind of agree on what is and is not orthodox. So there's not this mixture of like, we don't know, that Bart Ehrman talks about. From the beginning, you have these writers saying this is in canon, this, or they're not using the word canon, but this is in our tradition and this isn't in our tradition. This is orthodox, this is heresy. You have that from the beginning. So I don't know what's going on there with the scholars acting like it's a hodgepodge, and like we just can't tell because we don't know when exactly all these things were written. You got stuff being written as early as a 50 AD, and you don't have the Gnostic text showing up until 100, 200 AD. So you clearly can see the divide between what's original and what's later just by time. The Bible's canonized as a reaction to these false manuscripts that came up, but the false manuscripts, the pseudepigrapha, the I forget the word. I want to say apocrypha, but I think there's another word as well. But these false forgeries, uh, they come up after. They're not happening here in the beginning. And I even acknowledge and talk about how they weren't considered forgeries in this tradition if it was a student or it was in the school of or a disciple of, because the idea was that there's a written tradition and there's an oral tradition, and that the oral tradition eventually gets written down. So this oral tradition would eventually be written down, but we would assume that it's just as authoritative as the written letter, as the epistles. Okay, so that's why they're not considered forgeries. They're the writing down of the tradition, and the tradition goes back to the oral story. So I cover all of that pretty well, actually. And then I get into the church fathers, and it's funny because John, the last gospel, it's funny that Revelation is the big controversial one, but technically John maybe could have even been written after Revelation. John is actually written in the church father era, in this time period where it's the students of the students who are like, hey, let's explain what all this stuff means. Let's explain what we're doing, why we're using literary, I'm going to call them tricks. Why are we using literary tricks or literary methods to explain who Jesus was? And they write all this down because they know that people are going to misunderstand, and people have different perspectives. I don't think I did a really good job of explaining John Chrysostom's place in the history of the church fathers, because he comes a little later after the period, but his writings illuminate all the and kind of ground all those church father writings. And then I do also a pretty poor job of explaining that the Didache is the collected teachings of the apostles, while written at the same time as Luke and Acts. It's not written by Luke, and I'm pretty sure there's probably a tradition out there that says that it is written by Luke, but I don't do a good job of stretching those things out. But to explain them better, I'd have to write even another two or three paragraphs, which would then turn this into a 13 or 14 page essay, and I'm already trying to knock it down to a 6 pager. You know what I mean? Okay. Anyway, um, so then let's see. Then I get into, well, I talk about the apostolic stage of the church, and then from the apostolic tradition, and I explain a little bit of Stephen, and a little bit of how apostolicity works, the laying of hands, the breathing on. I then get into creedal traditions and how it is Gnosticism that leads to the creedal stage of Christianity, and the creed is seen as an inoculation or a vaccine against the encroaching of the Gnostic texts, of Arianism, of all these things that are coming up. I breeze through that pretty fast, and then I get into further history. So I explain how the Pope, how papal power grows. It starts off with first the bishops becoming patriarchs, and the patriarchs then becoming the head of these surviving churches, or and there's like the powerful seas and the minor seas. And then I explain how eventually Rome starts growing in political power and political capital, and how the Byzantine Church and the Eastern Church begins collapsing under the weight of and the encroachment of Islam, and the whether it's first the Persians, first Parthia versus Rome, and that turns into uh, Parthia versus Rome. So Persia versus Rome, Parthia versus Rome. Then, as Parthia gets conquered by Islamic invaders from Arabia, you have the Turks and everyone becoming Muslim. And you then have these two Abrahamic monotheistic religions fighting each other in the East. But in the West, you have win after win after win. You have, you know, Italy becoming Catholic. You have France becoming Catholic. You have, or Gaul becoming Catholic, I should say. You have Hispania becoming Catholic. And you even eventually get Britain becoming Catholic. I mean, these are huge, huge moves. So I think that emboldens the Pope to take more and more power. Mind you, that the Pope isn't the only one called Pope. Pope is a title from the people, and it's not the Pope taking on the title. It's not the pontiff. It's not the head bishop of these different sees. It's the people are throwing this title to them. So there's different popes in different areas. I think there's a pope in Antioch, one in Alexandria. I'm not sure if the bishop in Constantinople takes the title pope as well. Anyway, so you have pope just means papa. You have you have Latin people calling him papa. I don't know what the translation is in Greek, and the patriarch of the Latin Rite begins growing. And the real big turning point is when not only does it seem that certain controversies are solved by Rome, not necessarily the Pope, but by the council that's there, the bishops there, but the authority of Rome then gets exercised with, I believe it's Attila the Hun, and they turn him away, not with a war, but with peace. And that becomes this big moment in the church. So you have this earlier moment with Constantine, where political power becomes established in the with the church. They kind of intermixed, in 312. But then you have this later development where it's like, okay, the church, because Constantine kind of gives credit to the church more than he gives credit to himself. The Pope just goes, yeah, it's divine providence. We stopped scourged the from attacking and sacking Rome. But it's not that easy. It's not as if everything goes well for Rome. I explain how there are drawbacks, how even as things get defined, and I explain when each thing is defined, especially more so on the longer version. I explain when the Trinity is defined, when the natures of Christ is defined. And I've read this stuff, some of which I've read on this channel. Those videos were not very popular, but I have read this stuff online, and I have talked about this stuff before. Um, the definitions are there, the writings are there. People can go reference this stuff. I don't know why Islamic apologists and why atheistic, I'm gonna call them apologists, act as if this stuff isn't there. You can go read the definition and go read how they came to these conclusions, and they make sense. Okay, let's see. How long have I been going? Let's go a little bit longer. Um, so I then try to get to modern history. I first do my best to explain the Great Schism, the Minor Schism, although I kind of skip over the Minor Schism pretty quickly. Um, and there's another schism that I completely forgot about that I include in this, but I somehow skipped the Minor Schism, whatever. Uh, then I get into explaining what the role of the Orthodox Church was, how it was important to the history of the church, and how it fell out of prominence. And I explained how Pope Gregory and clashed with Empress Irene, I believe, and that's that's the beginning of the end, and it goes all the way until the sacking, not the sacking of Rome, but the sacking of um, Constantinople and the Hagia Sophia. It's disgusting what the mercenaries do, and they're mercenaries who are at least presenting themselves as representing the Latin Church. There's just no coming back from that. It's truly a horrific thing that happens. The Pope does condemn it, but it's too late. The break has happened, and anyway, so I go through all of that. In the shorter version, I don't spend enough time doing it. Um, Damn it, I gotta charge something. Oh, I'm sliding down. Okay. So I do my best there. In the shorter version, I really feel I did not do enough explanation on the Great Schism, but on the longer version, everything's in there. I explain the plight of the Jewish people after the expulsion from Rome, and I use that narrative to get to modern times, because once things start going bad for the Jewish people, it just keeps getting worse, all the way until you get to World War II and the Holocaust. So I then use that turnaround to explain some more modern Protestant developments, such as was the charismatic movements and missionary work. Of course, I do cover though briefly, the tragedy of what happened in the New World after Christopher Columbus. And then I get to modern history, I get to the current times, and obviously I haven't finished editing anything. That's kind of it. I don't know how to turn this into a 15-minute video. I don't know how to sum all that up. Even just talking right now, that we went about an hour, and I was planning on only being 30 minutes, you know? If anyone's here in the chat, please talk. Please give me some questions, because I'm about to wrap up. But I mean, have you, anyone watching this later on, put in the comments if you have had trouble finding unbiased sources to reference for the actual history of the church, or the actual history of Christianity, um, that explains why we call ourselves Catholic, whether we're Orthodox or Christian, or Christian, whether we're Orthodox or Latin, whether we're Roman or Greek, whether we're Chalcedonian, whether we're Anglican, Lutheran, why we use the designation Catholic. I feel like a lot of this stuff gets lost in the weeds, and people just are so intent on hating each other that they forget what the broader narrative is, and what holds us together and unites us. There are other social, political things that I want to talk about when it comes to religion, but I think this is really where I'm gonna end it right now for this. I hope you all enjoyed watching this. For those who are coming in later, I really should have put an announcement that I'm doing this. I wanted to do a watch together, actually, for Oppenheimer. So any of my usual viewers are interested in for that, let me know and we can schedule something. I have changed jobs, so I will have more time for streaming, but I might not have as much cash to be able to keep some of the programs that I'm using to run things like Adobe, because that's kind of expensive. So there might be some changes. This is day one. I'll do the grind. If you guys are watching my Twitter, I will do something there. I don't know what. If you're watching any of my other channels, I don't know if I'm ever gonna get back around to them. To be honest, I want to do more on the bike riding and the martial arts stuff, but I don't know if I'll get around to it. Anyway, I don't see any comments, so peace, like, and subscribe. Have you all? Well, if you're watching right now, comment right now. I'll gladly talk to you. But if you guys don't have anything to say, I'm probably just gonna jump out. I'll give you guys a minute, see if there's anything, and then I think I'm out. It's 3 in the morning. Hot dog it. All right. I think that's going to be it. I really appreciate anyone who watched this live and anyone who's watching it afterwards. Thank you so much. As I like to say at the end of all my videos, peace.